I found my dad's Mistress address, and she's my childhood teacher. I never wanted to know. I never asked. But the truth has a way of finding you when you least expect it. My family wasn't perfect, but whose is? We had our flaws, our silences, our days that felt like they dragged under a weight no one wanted to name. But I believed in us. I believed in my father. Until the day I found out he had been lying to us all along. It started with a simple mistake. A bank statement left open on the kitchen counter. My mother never checked my father's financial documents. She trusted him blindly. But something about the paper caught my eye. A transaction for a hotel, then another for a jewelry store, and a third, a monthly payment to a woman's name I didn't recognize. Curiosity turned to dread. Who was this woman? And why was my father sending her money every month? I knew I shouldn't snoop. I told myself it wasn't my business. But the thought gnawed at me, made my stomach twist with something I didn't have words for. That night, when everyone was asleep, I took my father's laptop. It was wrong, I knew that. But something inside me whispered that I needed to know the truth. And I found it, buried in his emails, hidden in a folder titled Work Expenses. Her name was Melissa Carter. I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. The emails stretched back for years, romantic words, secret meetings, shared hotel rooms. My father wasn't just having an affair. He was living a double life. I copied her address from one of the receipts, my hands shaking. My father had been careful to delete most of their conversations, but not careful enough. There it was, staring back at me. An address in the same city. Place I could walk to if I wanted. But I had no idea that when I got there, I wouldn't just find my father's mistress. I would find someone from my past. The name Melissa Carter felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. Not until I stood outside the small townhouse, staring at the numbers on the door. My chest tightened. Couldn't be. I looked up at the window, half expecting to see the same warm, smiling face I had known as a child. Because Melissa Carter wasn't just my father's mistress. She was my second-grade teacher. I felt like the ground had been ripped from under me. I remembered her so clearly, Miss Carter. She had been one of my favorite teachers, the kind who made the classroom feel like a second home. I had adored her. And now she was the reason my family was falling apart. I should have left. I should have walked away. But I couldn't. My feet carried me forward before I could stop myself. I knocked on the door, my heart pounding. Seconds felt like hours before it swung open. She looked the same but different. Older. Tired. Her face shifted from polite curiosity to shock as recognition hit her. I didn't need to say a word. She knew why I was there. I didn't know, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I didn't know you were his daughter. I wanted to believe her. But how could I? How could she not know? Had she really spent all these years sneaking around with my father, oblivious to the fact that she had once taught his daughter how to read, how to believe in kindness, how to trust? The betrayal cut deeper than I thought possible. I turned and walked away, ignoring her calling my name. My mind was a blur. How much had she known? Had she met me at parent-teacher conferences and smiled in my mother's face, knowing she was sleeping with her husband? Had she ever thought about me at all? I couldn't tell my mother. Not yet. The weight of the truth was too heavy. But I couldn't keep it to myself either. I did the only thing I could think of. I wrote my father a letter. No accusations. No anger. Just the truth of what I had found and how it had shattered everything I believed about him. I left it on his desk the next morning. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't want to hear his excuses or apologies. Some things couldn't be undone. Days passed. My father didn't mention the letter, but something in the house shifted. My mother noticed it too. She asked me if I was okay, if something had happened. I wanted to tell her everything, but I couldn't bear to break her heart the way mine had been broken. Then one night I heard them arguing. My mother's voice, raw and broken, my father's low and pleading. He had confessed. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or sick. Maybe both. A week later, he moved out. It wasn't the ending I had imagined. There were no dramatic confrontations, no screaming matches. Just the quiet, aching loss of something I had once trusted. My mother didn't ask how I knew. Maybe she didn't want to know. Maybe she had already suspected and was too afraid to face it. For months, I felt like I was carrying a secret I wished I had never uncovered. Pain didn't fade as quickly as I hoped. I felt angry, not just at my father but at the version of him I had believed in. The man who had tucked me into bed as a child, who had cheered me on at my soccer games, who had promised me the world. He was gone. And in his place was a stranger who had lied and broken us apart. I never saw Miss Carter again. I didn't want to. The woman who had once felt like a second mother had become a stranger. The days turned into months, and slowly life found a way of moving forward. My mother threw herself into work, into hobbies she had long abandoned. She started painting again, filling our house with bright, abstract colors that almost masked the emptiness my father left behind. I focused on school, on my friends, on trying to be okay even when I wasn't. But healing isn't linear. Some days I felt fine. Other days I felt an unbearable rage bubbling inside me, at my father, at Miss Carter, at the universe for dealing me this hand. I resented the fact that I had to carry this burden at 17, that I had to pick up the pieces of a life someone else had broken. It took me a long time to realize that closure doesn't always come in the way you expect it. It doesn't come with an apology or a neatly wrapped ending. Sometimes closure is simply learning to exist despite the pain. It's learning to forgive not because they deserve it, but because you do. One day, I saw my father at a coffee shop. He looked different, older, more tired. He saw me too, but neither of us moved to speak. There was nothing left to say. We were two people who once shared a life, now reduced to strangers with nothing but memories and regret between us. I walked past him without a word. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. I used to believe that people were either good or bad, that right and wrong were clear lines, easy to separate. But life isn't that simple. My father wasn't a monster. My teacher wasn't a villain. They were just people who made choices that ruined lives. And I was just a girl who had to live with the truth. But here's the thing about truth, it doesn't just destroy. It also sets you free. Slowly, I learned to let go of the anger. I stopped blaming myself for what had happened, stopped wishing I could unsee the things I had uncovered. My mother and I rebuilt our lives in small, quiet ways, morning coffees together, long walks, learning to laugh again. The hurt was still there, but so was love. And love, I realized, was stronger.